Human rights and governance situation in Ethiopia and the status of U.S. relations with Ethiopia. Given Ethiopia's important cooperation in opposing Islamic militants in Somalia, as well as its cooperation in other counterterrorism and peacekeeping efforts, the administration, however, has been reluctant, in my opinion, to seriously hold the Ethiopian government to account for persistent, egregious human rights violations, including the inability of the opposition political parties to function, restrictions on civil society organizations, journalists that prevent them from operating freely, and forced removals of citizens from their lands. I know they're raised, but my hope is that additional weight will be given. According to USAID's Assistant Administrator for East Africa, Earl Gast, and we're very delighted to have you here, USAID believes that open channels of communication with the Ethiopian government create opportunities to influence democracy, rights, and governance issues. And I know that is a very real and powerful belief, and it may work, but unfortunately we haven't seen the fruit. However, Amnesty International will testify today, and I quote, "Since 2005, the human rights situation in the country has deteriorated still further, with significantly increased restrictions placed on freedom of expression, association, and other rights. Sadly, the Ethiopian authorities have not acted in a vacuum during this period. According to Amnesty, the U.S. and others in the international community have failed to raise concern over the government's systematic violation of human rights and flouting of its international obligations. The failure to speak out and press for change has emboldened the government and has allowed Ethiopia to set a dangerous example for other governments in the region to emulate. It is critical that the United States and other members of the international community," Amnesty goes on, "to press the Ethiopian authorities to address human rights concerns and repeal and reform key legislation and policies," close quote. Amnesty also notes that in its testimony that for the Ethiopians held in detention, conditions continue to be extremely harsh. Torture is regularly reported to take place during interrogation, in the initial stages of detention, often before the detainees have access to their families or to legal representatives. Prisoners have been slapped, suspended from the walls and ceilings by their wrists, beaten with various objects, denied sleep, electrocuted, and had weights suspended from the genitalia. Solitary confinement for extended periods is often reported. Within prison facilities, sanitation was often reported to be poor. Amnesty International has received reports of medical resources being withheld and reports of deaths in custody. I would note parenthetically that I'll never forget in the 1980s, as a relatively new member of Congress, I was elected in 1981, reading Amnesty's report called Tortures in the 80s, and it talked about what was going on in certain African countries, including Ethiopia, and barbaric mistreatment of detainees. And sadly, as they will say today, it continues in Ethiopia today. Ethiopia is Africa's second most populous country after Nigeria, as we all know, and the United States considers its government to be an important development and regional security partner, as it is. Ethiopia plays a key leadership role in the region, hosts the African Union headquarters, and is a major troop contributor to UN peacekeeping operations. According to the State Department, the three pillars of bilateral relationship with Ethiopia are economic growth and development, democracy, governance, and human rights, and regional peace and security. Deputy Assistant Secretary for State and Human Rights and Labor, Karen Hanrahan, stated in October in a speech, "Advancing democracy and human rights is one of our highest priorities in our engagement with Ethiopia. Nevertheless, it has been difficult to get cooperation from the current and previous administrations in confronting the government of Ethiopia. And as you know, Ambassador Yamamoto, under the Bush administration, I actually introduced the Ethiopia Human Rights Act because of that lack of cooperation and that lack of progress." In June of 2005, following a contentious election in which Prime Minister Meles and his party seemed to suffer unexpected losses, demonstrators led by college students took to the streets to protest a delayed release of the election results. The government's reaction was to deploy snipers who shot and killed protesters and to jail hundreds of others. An increasingly violent response to protests took place in November of that year. The death toll resulting from both protests was approximately, or put at 193, but the numbers arrested has never been confirmed. In the summer of 2005, I traveled to Ethiopia along with Greg Simpkins to assess the situation and to meet with Prime Minister Meles. members of his government, political opposition leaders, including one of our witnesses today, Berhane Nege, civil society representatives, the religious community, and the diplomatic community as well. What I found was a government leader who was arrogant in his certainty that he could arrest his political opposition whenever and wherever he wanted. I also found a political opposition convinced that they had won a majority in the legislative elections of that year. Unfortunately, the government's view won the day, and I do say, Ambassador Yamamoto, I know you spoke out here as well as in Addis over and over again expressing the consternation and the opposition of the administration and, of course, of the State Department, and I always will thank you for that. Mr. Nege and other political leaders were arrested and held in jail for more than a year on charges that they had to continually be charged due to repeated failure to convict them. Some of them who managed to be released from jail found themselves forced to live outside the country, such as Mr. Nege. The political space for opposition parties, as you say in your testimony, is restricted. The imprisonment and prosecution of political prisoners has dissolved parties and caused reformulations that also weren't able to continue. Mr. Nega founded Gimbal 7, a new political party in Ethiopia, but 2 years ago it was declared a terrorist organization by the Meles government. And not only was it unable to operate openly, but Ethiopian journalists were prevented from reporting on the party or on its statements. Similarly, the government of Ethiopia, according to the State Department Human Rights Report, continued to imprison more than 400 opposition leaders, activists, and local journalists by the end of 2012, many on vague national security-related charges. As of 2011, the Ethiopian government had completed long-term cheap land leases on more than 3.6 million hectares, equivalent to the size of the Netherlands, mainly to large-scale foreign agricultural investors. In addition, 200 million hectares of land have since been made available for such leases to foreigners. An estimated 1.5 million Ethiopians in 4 regions have been displaced, many of them subject to a supposedly voluntary program known as villagization. Others displaced due to these land leases or because of major dam projects now reside in refugee camps in Kenya. Despite an unacceptable political and human rights environment in Ethiopia, we hold out some hope that the post-Meles government may yet change. I remember when you testified, Ambassador Yamamoto, in 2006, you talked about being at a crossroads, and the hopes for change were right back there with that hope for change. Earlier this month, thousands of Ethiopians protested political repression in the capital city of Addis. Under the late President Meles, such a show of defiance likely would have been met with official violence and snipers and mass arrests. But the government of the current Prime Minister, Haile Mariam Desalegn, did not react that way, and this is an encouraging sign. Our witnesses today include the former U.S. ambassador to Ethiopia, the U.S. official in charge of our significant aid portfolio to Ethiopia, the former elected mayor of Addis, a member of the first U.S. delegation to meet with the current government, and a longtime Ethiopian activist on human rights. And I look forward to your testimonies and yield to my friend and colleague, Ms. Bass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for having this meeting. I want to get quickly to the witnesses, so I just want to make a brief statement. One, I had the privilege and honor of being in Addis a few weeks ago at the 50th anniversary of the African Union, along with Ambassador Yamamoto, and it was exciting to be there, and I look forward to going back in August for a seminar with the Aspen Institute. I think that there are a lot of exciting things happening in Ethiopia. The economy, I'm hoping that things will be worked out with Egypt over the development of the dam. And as we think about the economic progress, and I think most folks around the world do celebrate that, I do have to say that from the district that I represent in Los Angeles, there's an area of my district that's called Little Ethiopia. And I know we debate as to who has the largest Ethiopian population outside of the country, but I know that LA is either number 1 or number 2 behind the District of Columbia. And I will tell you that since I have represented the area, I've been in Congress 3 years, but I was in the state legislature for 6 years before that. And for all 6 years, I heard from the Ethiopian residents who have consistently expressed their concerns about the human rights issue, especially after the 2005 election. I was actually preparing to go, and then the election happened, and it clearly became a situation where I couldn't travel there. But over the years, I have heard about a number of the human rights abuses that the chair described. There have been people that have visited Los Angeles who have been persecuted in the country and came to, one, see if we would be able to support them in the United States. And I know many of my constituents feel that they can't even go home to visit. And so I'm looking forward to the testimony. I want to get to that. As Mr. Chair said, we probably are going to be interrupted again. I'm hoping we'll be able to get through both panels before we have to go back for an even longer, serious vote. So I thank the witnesses for coming this morning. I look forward to hearing what you have to say, as I always do, especially from the two of you. But, you know, I really would like to take the opportunity of this hearing to drill down and find out exactly what the situation is, what our government is doing about it, and what the future might hold. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, Ethiopia is a critical U.S. ally, and they have helped us oppose, Islamist militants in Somalia. They host the African Union headquarters, and as has been mentioned, the second most populous country in Africa. So they're the key to the Horn of Africa, and also the key to West Africa, and to some extent the Arabian Peninsula. And even yesterday, we heard about attacks at the UN Development Office there at Mogadishu. And this region as a whole is still very volatile, and so the importance of an ongoing relationship with Ethiopia cannot be overstated. And so that's why it's disheartening to see some of the problems that we still need to address there. One party, as has been mentioned, dominates Ethiopia's political system. The media is often harassed. Basic freedoms are still restricted. So these are real concerns, and as Ethiopia's parliament passes new regressive laws, we need to see steps forward. And I am hoping to hear today from you those steps that we can take that will move forward and that exist. And as Ethiopia is one of the largest recipients of U.S. bilateral assistance in fiscal year 2012, as we continue to look to Ethiopia to be a good friend, we want to make sure that those relationships are not only good for the United States, but for the people of Ethiopia as a whole. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meadows. I'd like to now welcome our very distinguished witnesses, beginning with Ambassador Donald Yamamoto, who is no stranger to this subcommittee, having testified before us several times in the last sessions of Congress and again a few weeks ago. He is now serving with distinction as the Acting Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of African Affairs in the U.S. Department of State. His prior assignments including serving as U.S. Ambassador to Ethiopia, as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau for African Affairs, and most recently as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in that Bureau. He also served in Djibouti, Eritrea, Japan, and China, and again has had a long and distinguished career in the Foreign Service. We'll then hear from Mr. Earl Gast, who is USAID's Assistant Administrator for Africa, and has worked at USAID in leading development programming, especially post-conflict and transitioning societies. He's also been a frequent witness before the subcommittee. We always benefit from his insights and counsel. Prior to his current position, Mr. Gast served in Afghanistan, Colombia, Eastern Europe, and Rome. Mr. Gast is also one of the first USAID employees stationed in Iraq. He played an equally important role in developing the post-crisis strategy for Kosovo, overseeing all mission operations. Most prominently, he received the agency's award for heroism and the Distinguished Unit Award. Gentlemen, please proceed, beginning with Ambassador Yamamoto.
Thank you very much, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Bass and the other honored members. And I ask for submission of my full statement for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I want to, on my oral presentation, I want to add points that are kind of different from the statement that I submitted. Today's hearing raises issues that will advance the hope of Ethiopia's people for the future of their country. Yet the path that lays ahead will be marked on how the people, the government, opposition, and civil society can work cooperatively and harmoniously together to come to terms not only with Melis's legacy, but how they will work together to define or possibly redefine the future course for Ethiopia. What Melis achieved when he was a prime minister for Ethiopia was economic growth, set political policies that have guided Ethiopia since the fall of the Derg, as well as the establishment of Ethiopia's regional and international importance. The Prime Minister became the indispensable negotiator in Somalia, the critical mediator in Sudan, the eloquent spokesperson for all of Africa on climate and development challenges. He proved to be an effective person whose persuasive and forceful negotiation style and intellectual depth of understanding of issues set the tone and course of discussions on important domestic and regional issues. His articulate discussions of issues with crystal clear and insightful assessment distinguished him as a political leader, but also brought Ethiopia and Africa heightened respect and authority. However, the cost of his efforts also raised concerns. As ambassador, I raised on behalf of the United States our voice on the narrowing of political space, and we spoke clearly and decisively that the laws which were passed in and by themselves may appear logical and necessary, but when taken together and implemented without judgment or judicious temperament, could prove not only a severe obstacle to personal freedoms and economic independence, but also, if pursued without wisdom, could significantly alter Ethiopia's image in a profoundly negative manner. How Ethiopia's people, political rulers, opposition groups, and civil society work together to deal with not only the legacy of Meles, but to define where the country moves forward in a hopeful direction, or falls into gridlock of political partisanships dominated by uncompromising views, where alternate views or voices are based on what is merely wrong rather than on what needs to be done. What must be achieved to realize a more democratic and hopeful future for Ethiopia remains the challenge. Ethiopia, again, I believe, is an important crossroad in which the country, mindful of its past, has the opportunity to move forward. As Congresswoman Bass said, she and Secretary Kerry were at the African Union Summit, and there, Prime Minister Haile Mariam, as President of the African Union, outlined a key direction not only for Ethiopia, but for all of Africa. That is to invest in the economy, to realize a transformation to a more technical world, investment in technology and vocational education, commitment to infrastructure development, overcoming bureaucratic red tape, and reasonable laws, and finally to promote democratic values. These are great, but there are also great challenges as well as great hopes. If not handled astutely and with great political skill, as well as courageous and decisive action, Ethiopia may also go down a very different path, in which its future could be sacrificed to partisan politics. It will take much understanding, compromise, tempered by deep commitment to achieving what is in the interest of the people of Ethiopia, and not in deference to political positions or personal preferences. And so the United States will forever remain dedicated to the core values and goals of democratic values and human rights policies, as well as economic prosperity and security. We stand firmly with Ethiopia, its people, its future generation, to achieve together a better future for Ethiopia and for Africa. And I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Gast.
Good morning, Chairman Smith. Good morning, Ranking Member Bass, and good morning to all other members of the subcommittee. And thank you very much for inviting me here to speak before you today on an important topic, and that is Ethiopia after Prime Minister Meles. The death last year of Prime Minister Meles Zenawi marked the end of an era in Ethiopia. Fully half of the population had never known another leader or another style of leadership, and his passing brought with it hope and trepidation for the country's future. 10 months later, the ruling EPRDF remains firmly in control of all organs of government. In recent years, Ethiopia has experienced a period of relative stability, marked improvements in the well-being of its people, and an increasingly important position in the international community. The government's Productive Safety Net Program, or PSNP, which provides food and cash in exchange for building community infrastructure, helped provide 7.2 million persons with income and sources and prevented them from slipping into crisis during the 2011 to 2012 drought. The availability of education and health services has flourished, even in remote communities, and economic opportunities are expanding for youth and women. Ethiopia is also one of the United States' key African partners in fighting terrorism, promoting national and regional food security, and providing peacekeepers in some of the most difficult locations in Africa. But at the same time, the Ethiopian government systematically limits space for political parties, independent media, and civil society to operate, significantly constraining the ability of people to influence government decisions and hold their government accountable. And you say we have a two-pronged approach to democracy, human rights, and governance issues. The first integrates these issues into our core programs in other sectors to support social and economic resilience and encourage communities to participate in decision-making. For example, by supporting the creation of decentralized financial systems at 76 government hospitals, you say not only improve the quality of medical services, but we also strengthen these institutions in financial management, accountability, and transparency. The second prong of our approach in Ethiopia capitalizes on opportunities as they arise to promote respect for human and civil rights. Toward this end, we support political dialogue, legal education, and court reforms through a variety of organizations and through the government itself. Although there are major impediments to working with Ethiopian civil society groups, we do support the organizations that accountably deliver services in a manner that is respectful to human rights. Our strategy is capitalized on Ethiopia's commitment to poverty reduction by supporting sustainable development through community-based decision-making and public involvement in every area of our work, whether it's agriculture, economic growth, health, education. We encourage social accountability mechanisms, such as scorecards and participatory budgeting, to help citizens hold government accountable for service delivery, and institute the practice of participation and dialogue. And by working together with the government of Ethiopia on our shared agendas to advance economic growth and development, we are fostering opportunities for dialogue about public participation and transparency while having real positive effects that will accumulate over time into significant change that will increasingly enable and encourage democratic governance. Ongoing dialogue with the Ethiopian government creates opportunities to advocate reforms that will hold government accountable and gradually expand political rights and civil liberties. By integrating democracy and governance work into the significant investments that we're making, USAID we are gaining important opportunities to support social and economic resilience in Ethiopian society. I very much welcome this opportunity to discuss our programs in greater detail, and would let
Mr. Guest, thank you so much. At a deference to our second panel, I'll only ask one question because we have so little time because of about 2 hours of voting that's pending, I should say. Let me just, you mentioned that sustainable development requires good governance. We know that the request for, or the fiscal year 13, not the request, the actual money, of the $351 million in total aid, $1 million has been reserved for democracy-type programs. And I'm wondering, you emphasize the importance of balance. Can that be beefed up? Are there opportunities that are going awry? And as you know, when it comes to child survival and trying to mitigate the problems of HIV/AIDS and all the other, I take a backseat to no one, but it seems to me that helping get that good governance it has to be an equal high priority with those other things. Secondly, on torture, same question, or if you could answer it at the same time. I've authored 4 torture victims relief acts to help people who have suffered PTSD and all of the physical and psychological deleterious effects from torture. I have met with more torture victims everywhere in the world, have had hearings where we've heard from them, and yet people today in Ethiopia are being tortured. What are we doing to stop that?
Thank you for your question, Chairman. Working in Ethiopia truly is a dilemma. We as an agency are elevating the importance of human rights in all of our programming. It's a key component of our democracy, human rights, and governance strategy. And the dilemma really is that we're seeing a government that is investing in its people. It is doing the right things in terms of social investment and social accountability. Yet, on the other hand, when we look at specific instances that you mentioned, that I know Ambassador Yamamoto will talk about, and then when we look at indices that measure human rights and governance and independent media, we see that space is closing and continues to close. So it is a dilemma for us, and it's a debate that we have internally, and we also have with our State Department colleagues as well as people in the White House. So our approach has been to support the good things that are happening to support people. That would be in education. And when you look, Chairman, five years ago, where enrollment rates were only at about 20%, and you see that enrollment rates are now at 90%. When you see the significant rise, not only in literacy in the country and among students, but especially among girls and women. And we look at other health statistics, including child survival, and also maternal mortality. We know that the government is making investments.
But on the education front, even in your testimony, you say that Ethiopia has nearly achieved the second millennium goal to achieve universal primary education, but then the big but, that it is inferior, it lacks the quality of education, and is well below standards. So with every seemingly good thing, there's a seemingly downside to it.
Sure, but the literacy rates are high, and so what we're doing as an agency is focusing on outcomes. The numbers are good, now we need to focus on the qualitative aspects. And we're doing that in partnership with the government in training 20,000 teachers throughout the country and truly emphasizing learning outcomes.
And are we visiting political prisoners, Ambassador? I'm sorry, it's so little time.
Yes, we are. And of course, when I was the ambassador there, we had many discussions and visits to the prisons to not only look at the conditions of the prisons, but also to look at how we can stop any abusive behavior there and to investigate. And that's what we've been doing quite a bit.
I have several questions that I will submit just because of time. Yield to Ms. Bass.
I will try to be quick also. I wanted to know if you could say, and if you can, we need to talk afterwards, let me know, but what happens when we raise the issues of human rights? I mean, what's the basis of the contradiction? You know, you describe, and I'm, aware too of Ethiopia's great progress, that you mentioned several indices. So why is the government so fearful? What's the basis of the problem, and what happens when we raise it with them?
I'll give you a couple examples. During the 2005, when probably about 30,000 were detained after that election and the violence that subsequently followed, there was about 71 political prisoners, and one of them is going to be on your panel. We worked very hard to work with them and the government to get them out and also to visit them in prison, and we did that. I think the issue is to the laws that were passed, the terrorist laws, the NGO laws, etc., have been very restrictive. And it goes back to where is the comfort level for the government and how they can balance between what is security-related and what really is openness. I mean, when you have a country that doesn't even have internet connection from BlackBerry.
Get to that.
Yeah, so that comes to why. I mean, why not have the openness? And those are things that we're working with the government behind the scenes and also in public, and to show them how the benefits are for these issues.
So the basis of the fear? I mean, it seems to me that that's the reason for this. My constituents had asked me when I was in the state legislature, they had wanted me to do a resolution, and in thinking about it, it might have been a resolution in support of what you were doing. The Human Rights Bill. We weren't able to do that because it just dealt with state issues. We didn't get into foreign policy. But, again, when I talk to constituents, they just paint such a very different picture. And so the basis of the fear is a fear, first of all, and the basis of it is.
But this is a crossroad. I mean, if Prime Minister Harry said at the AU in front of everyone, democratic values are important, unreasonable laws are not good, let's do it. Let's test it. Let's go forward. I think that is what we need to do.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Meadows.
I'm
sorry.
We have also seen some recent openings, and so, for example, the Ethiopian government has invited some experts, foreign experts, to come in to look at registration of religious organizations in the country. So we see that as an opening. A second one is that we are allowed to work with civil society organizations that are doing peace building, community peace building activities. And then the third thing that's happening is a forum that will be taken around the country to review and discuss the Charities and Societies Proclamation. And that's the one that severely limits the ability of development agencies of working with civil society organizations. I can't say that it's a perfect picture. It's nowhere near a perfect picture. But there are some openings, as Ambassador Yamamoto cited.
Mr. Meadows?
I'm going to submit most of my questions for the record, but Mr. Ambassador, I have one question that I'd like you to address today if we can. Ethiopia, as we've mentioned, is a de facto one-party country, and you noted in your ruling that the ruling party controls every aspect of government. I think it was 545 of 547 seats on their parliament. What can we do to help facilitate healthy opposition? And if there is a real opposition party that emerges, do you see that destabilizing the country or help push for human rights or both?
And that's an excellent point, and that's the dilemma that we face. After the elections, we talked to the Prime Minister at that time and said we were very, very disappointed in that result because we made so many gains in 2005, though there was problems on violence. Are we going backwards? We need to move forward, and those are the areas that I think we were working with this new governor and Prime Minister Haile Mariam. But it is, how do you develop the opposition? To be a very forceful voice for the people, and how can you allow them to be that forceful voice? Those are the areas that we've been trying to work very keenly in our democracy issues, but also behind the scenes and with the government in private. It's going to take time, but we are pushing very hard on various programs and opportunities. Like, for instance, I'll give you a couple examples. One of the things in all of Africa, not just Ethiopia, is the violence against women. We have started with AID, this hotline for battered women to call in and to get victims. That's an opening. Another issue is to have the judiciary process to help with women and minority groups and others. That's another opening. So if we can push things to the keep on pushing things. Maybe those will be areas for opening to help not only the government, but also the general atmosphere.
So do you see an opposition party helping with that, with the human rights?
Yes, but I think with the opposition, and I defer to Dr. Pananega, who has better views, is how can we help this? Because one day the opposition will be the governing party and vice versa. We've told that to the Prime Minister, we've told that to the government, you've got to prepare. You cannot rule consistently forever. It's impossible. And that's an issue that they understand, but how do you build that confidence? And that's, I think, the challenge we face.
So do you think they're fearful of an unstable environment? Is that the major opposition to having a viable two-party system?
I think that's one part.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meadows. And just in conclusion, I just want to thank you again. Ambassador Yamamoto, when you did testify on March 28, 2006, and I know you did this with the utmost sincerity, but you talked about hope for democracy, a new chapter, crossroads, and my hope is, hope springs eternal, that we will be dogged in our efforts to ensure that this time Ethiopia gets it right for the people's sake and for basic fundamental freedoms and basic human rights. So thank you. Many questions will be posed. I wish we could do it today. Maybe you don't, but thank you so much for being here and for working so closely with us. I'd like to now introduce our second panel.